Okay, guys, we are going to be touching on chemical formulas today. In the previous units, we've already touched on a little bit of chemistry with periodic tables and counting atoms already. So we already have a good start. So this will just keep adding to what we know. Today, our objective is that by the end of class, you guys will be able to recognize that chemical formulas are used to identify substances and determine the total number of atoms. So in simple form, you guys are going to be able to look at a chemical formula, break it apart, and count the total number of atoms. You guys will be able to accomplish this content objective by being able to show good listening. You're going to be following directions and collaborating with your peers. You're going to use basic vocabulary or newly learned vocabulary. And we are going to complete a bunch of tasks from board games to practice sheets to STAR test questions. My expectations for this is that you watch the full video. At any time, feel free to pause, take some notes, rewatch for clarification. At any time, if something is not making sense or you just have questions, please reach out to me. You can private message me on Google Classroom, or you can send me an email. Copy down all the notes in your science notebook at any time that I'm presenting a video or I am talking up here that I'm breaking something down. Go ahead and copy it down as well. Complete the independent work at the end of the class and then turn it back in for a completed grade. And then finally, and the most important, actively be watching the video and soaking up all the new knowledge. So right now you're probably wondering, why are you showing a video of baking a cake in science? Or are we talking about chemical and physical changes or any other thoughts you have? But honestly, baking a cake is just like chemical formulas. You have to mix a bunch of ingredients together to make a final product. So before we hop into the actual thing, I want to go over some vocabulary. I know we talked about this previously, but some of these are new and some are repeated. We already know what an element is. It is a pure substance. These are on capital letters that can be found on the periodic table. Remember, the periodic table is organized in a way of nonmetals, metals, and metalloids. Again, elements are represented by a capital letter. An atom, which is the basic unit of all matter, these are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. So we should be very familiar with that because we just finished that content. This is where the stuff gets a little bit new. There's something called a coefficient. Say it with me, coefficient. The number is placed in front of the chemical formula. It's the big boss, so therefore it has to be multiplied by everything in that equation. There's also a subscript, also a new word, so say it with me, subscript. Subscript is a tiny number under the element that tells you the number of atoms in that specific element. There's also a co-script. We're not going to talk a lot about it, but it's the subscript outside of a parentheses. There's a molecule, which is two or more bonded together. The coefficient actually tells you the number of molecules. And a chemical formula basically is just all of those put together. So you have an element, a coefficient, subscripts, co-subscripts to provide one giant formula. So before we get going, I just want to go over this. It's a great visual to use throughout this lesson or even when you're studying. So we talked about the cake already. So these reactants, these are the ingredients that go into the cake. The product at the end is the result. This is your cake. The subscript down here, as we talked about just now, is our tiny little number under the element. Our coefficient is our big boss that is in front of the chemical formula. What we're going to do is you're going to watch this video, take down notes in your science notebook, and just follow along. Here I'm going to show you how we can correctly break apart a chemical formula. As we know, chemical formulas are made up of 3 special parts. 1, we have a coefficient, we also have a subscript, and we have an element. Elements can be found on the periodic table, and they are represented by a capital letter. So let's go through and label each of these on our formula. First, I went ahead and I got some highlighters to help me. First, I'm going to grab this one for a coefficient. So our coefficient is going to be this yellow color. We know that our coefficient is our coach, and he is in front of the entire team. His rules go to everyone. So, looking at this formula, our coefficient is the number in front of everything else. So, what is the number? Yeah, it's going to be 4. So we can go ahead and highlight this area. The same yellow, so we know that this is a coefficient. Next, we have a subscript. Remember, our subscript is the tiny little number that falls under the elements. Our subscripts can help you with remembering that it's a submarine. Subscript, submarine. They both are under something. So let's look back up here. What is the tiny number that falls under the elements? Correct, that is going to be our 3 and our 2. Let's go ahead and also make sure our key is matching. So far, we have our coefficient, which we said was 4, our subscripts, which we said were 3 and 2. Now, we have to find our elements. Remember, our elements are the capital letters on the periodic table. So we have Ca right here, meaning that this is one element. Because the A is not capital, that means it falls with the C. So these are 1. For hydrogen, it is also an element that can be found on the periodic table. So before moving on, we already have all of our chemical formula labeled, from our coefficient being a 4, our elements, and our subscript. Now we are able to further break apart this equation. Down here, I have written number of molecules, elements, number of atoms of each, and total atoms. So in this one, our coefficient is known as a molecule. So in this formula, we have a total of 4 because 4 is our coefficient. So right here, I'm going to write 4. Next, we have to find our elements. We already have them labeled as this green color, so let's find them in our formula. We have Ca and H. Remember, Ca is together and H is by itself. So we have a total of 2 elements. Next, we're looking for the numbers of atoms for each element. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. Remember, we talked about our coefficient being our coach, so it has to be multiplied by the whole entire equation. So 4 will have to also be multiplied by 3. So for CA, 4 times 3 equals 12, correct? But we're not quite done because we still have hydrogen. But before we forget, 4 still has to be multiplied because it's the big boss in front. So we're going to go ahead and draw our arrow again. Now we have to do 4 times 2. 8. Good job. Now we are going to take our atoms for each of the elements and add them together to find our total number of atoms. All right, so you should have added 12 plus 8 to get a total of 20 atoms. Let's go through it one more time before we leave. So we have a chemical formula, which is made up of coefficients, subscripts, and elements. The coefficient is required to be multiplied by the entire equation. You can remember coefficient as the coach. The coach's rules go for the entire team. Next, it's made up of subscripts as well. Subscripts are the tiny little numbers that fall under the element. You can remember subscript as a submarine. Finally, we have elements that can be found on the periodic table and are represented by capital letters. So we have Ca and H. All of this together got us a total of 20 atoms. Please make sure you copy this down in your notebook and save the notes. All right, I hope you guys enjoy that and copy those notes down. You will use them for the rest of the class. Let's move on a little bit. Here is a chemical breakdown that I would like to work with you guys. It is just like we just did, except it's in a different format. So this is our chemical formula up here. Each is an element with a capital letter. So we have magnesium, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Just looking at magnesium, which is Mg, we have to find the subscript, which is 1, but it also has a coefficient. So we have to do 2 times 1 equals a total of 2. Next, we have carbon. Carbon has a subscript of 2, and it also has the coefficient. So we have to do 2 times 2 equal 4. Now let's look at hydrogen, the H. Again, it has a subscript of a 2 and a coefficient of a 2, making the total number of atoms of 4. Finally, at nitrogen, there's not a subscript, so we're going to assume it's just 1. But we still have to apply the coefficient of 2. 2 times 1 equals 2. To find the total number of atoms, all we have to do is add up 2 plus 4 plus 4 plus 2, which should get us 12. Just as a reminder, because this involves math, you guys are welcome to use any calculator. Most of you guys will have these. If not, you can use the calculators on your Chromebooks or on your cell phones. For additional practice, this will be turned in at the end of the class period or end of the lesson. I have gone ahead and showed you one example of how this counting atoms worksheet should go. It is the same exact thing, just exposed in a different format. So you have your elements and your number of atoms. You are going to first label all your elements down. So I have Na, which I have right here. I have oxygen, which I have right here. And I have hydrogen, which I have right there. So I have 3 here. I should have 3 capital letters. 1, 2, 3. There's not a subscript, so I'm going to assume Na has 1. I'm going to assume oxygen has 1, and hydrogen has 1 as well. As I add all three of those together, I get a total of 3 total atoms. You guys will work through 1 through 9 independently and submit it on Google Classroom whenever you are done. So now we are at the end. We've seen exposure. You guys should be going through your worksheet, but at this point, we should know most of it. We had practice. So here are some STAR questions. What we're going to do is watch the video and see how I broke it down. If you have problems, retry and stop the video, retry to learn it. If not, like I said, email me. Once I'm done with this one, you guys are going to work on this one and this one independently. We are finally at the end of this lesson, where now we should be able to apply what we learned from chemical formulas into answering a STAR question from the previous years. As a reminder, you guys can go ahead and use your chemical formula notes that we did at the very beginning. This will help you with finding the coefficient, subscript, and element, as well as finding the total number of atoms. I would keep this out to help you guys. I grabbed a highlighter so I can highlight anything that I find important as I break through this question. So let's go ahead and get started. It says a compound secreted by honeybees to paralyze intruders in their hive is known as a 2-heptatone. The formula in the compound is shown. So this is our formula. The question says how many atoms of each element are in one molecule of 2-heptatone. So right away, we're trying to find how many atoms are in the element. How many? So because we are looking at the whole formula, which is 2-heptatone, we are going to have to break apart this entire equation. So let's bring it back out. First, we have to see if we have a coefficient. In this case, we do not have a coefficient, so we're just going to assume that it is 1. Therefore, 1 is multiplied by each one. Next, we have to find the subscript, which is our tiny little number. So we have a subscript here. I'm going to go ahead and circle it. A subscript here, here, and here. Awesome. Last part, elements. These are the capital letters. We have a C, an H, a C again, but because we have it, we're just going to leave this one, an H again, a C again. Oh, we have an O this time. We're going to add O down here. A C again, we already have it, and an H. Now, we're going to have to find how many carbon atoms there are, hydrogen atoms, and oxygen atoms there are. So let's go find carbon. 1 times 1 is 1, so we have 1 plus the other carbon, which has 4, plus another carbon, which has 1, plus another carbon, which has 1 as well. So this is a reminder, you guys can use your calculators if you're not that great with math, or you could do it in your head or on paper, whatever you would like. For this case, I'm going to just show you on the calculator. So we have 1 plus 4 plus 1 plus 1 equals a total of 7 atoms. I'm going to go ahead and label atoms too so I know what we're talking about. So right off the bat, using my test-taking strategies, I can come over here and find which one says 7 atoms. 7 carbon atoms to be more specific. So this is 4 carbon atoms. We already know it's 7. so that can't be it. We keep going, 6 carbon atoms. No, we already said it's 7. So now we're broken down into only 2 questions answers left. Now we have to do the same thing to find hydrogen. Hydrogen is that big H. Remember, this is an element because it is a capital letter that can be found on the periodic table. We're going to do the same thing as we did with carbon. So this first hydrogen has a 3 plus 8 plus the last hydrogen has a 3. So again, I'm going to plug it in the calculator. I'm going to clear my previous. 3 plus 8 plus 3 equals a total of 14 atoms. So I'm going to go do what I just did, use my test-taking strategies. We have 7 carbon. These both match. We have 14 hydrogen. Ooh, so this is a difference. So we know it's not this one, but before we go ahead and choose B, let's go ahead and double check with the last one. Now, let's find oxygen. We only had 1 O up here, so that means we only have 1 oxygen, so equals 1 atom. So let's check it out. 7 carbon atoms, correct. 14 hydrogen atoms, correct. And 1 oxygen atom, correct. So B would be our correct answer for this one. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed and really saw how I broke that question apart. For all of these STAR questions and the worksheet problems, I want you to break it apart like that. For each element, you're going to count the number of atoms, and then at the end, you're going to total them up. This will help you ultimately not get confused. And just as a final reminder, use your calculator, or if you are good at math, go ahead and just write it down on the paper. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the lesson over chemical formulas. To touch up at the end and wrap it back to the beginning, today you guys were able to recognize that chemical formulas are used to identify different substances and determine the total number of atoms in a chemical formula. Basically, today you guys accomplished looking at a chemical formula, breaking it apart element by element, finding the atoms, and then finding the total atoms. Therefore, you guys have achieved the content objective for today. You guys also completed the language objective by using good listening, following the directions, and collaborating with your peers. You guys were supposed to be using basic vocabulary of coefficient, subscript, element. And you guys were able to complete this by going through each, the board game, the practice sheet, and the STAR questions. If you guys have any questions, please email me or message me on Google Classroom. If you are ready at school, I'm here to help you. Just let me know when. Have a good day.